There's something that happens when a Scorpio walks into the room. You can feel it before you see it. The temperature shifts. The air grows thicker. And suddenly, people start adjusting their masks, as if they're being watched not with eyes, but with truth. Now here's the irony. The one sign that sees through everyone is the one most people never truly see. Scorpio is the mirror no one wants to look into. Because to understand a Scorpio is to confront the deepest layers of yourself, the parts you avoid, suppress, or simply pretend don't exist. Most people don't misunderstand Scorpio because they're confused. They misunderstand them because they're afraid. Afraid of the silence. Afraid of the depth. Afraid of a presence that doesn't ask to be respected, it demands it by existing. But Scorpio never asked to be feared. They didn't sign up to play the villain in other people's projections. They didn't choose to be the dark mystery, they just refused to fake the light. In a world addicted to surface, Scorpio is the ocean floor. Uncomfortable. Cold. Unexplored. And yet, the only place where real treasure is found. So how did it come to this? How did one of the most loyal, intuitive, and spiritually gifted signs in the Zodiac become the most misunderstood? How did protectors become feared as predators? How did their silence become mistaken for arrogance, and their strength misread as danger? That's what we're about to uncover. In this video, I'm going to walk you through 12 powerful truths that will shake what you thought you knew about Scorpio. Not the surface-level traits. Not the horoscope cliches. But the soul-level explanations for why Scorpios are so misread by the world, and so painfully accurate about everyone else. And by the end, you might realize it's not that Scorpio is hard to understand. It's that most people have never been deep enough to try. So sit back. Open your spirit. And if you've ever loved a Scorpio, or are one, this is the clarity your soul has been craving. Let's begin. Reason 1. Scorpio doesn't trust easily, and that scares people. If there's one thing people crave more than love, it's trust. They want to be trusted instantly, without question. But when they meet a Scorpio, something's different. They feel like they're being observed, studied, measured. And they are. Because Scorpio doesn't hand out trust like candy on Halloween. No. Trust, for them, is sacred. Earned. Never assumed. And here's where the misunderstanding begins. Most people interpret Scorpio's caution as arrogance. They think, why are they so cold? Why do they keep their guard up? But they don't realize Scorpio has walked through betrayal before you even opened your mouth. They've learned, often too early in life, that not every smiling face is safe. Not every hand extended is honest. So instead of jumping into connections, they wait. They observe. They listen to what's not being said. It's not about being mean or mysterious. It's about protection. Not just of their hearts, but of their soul. Imagine this. You've built a palace inside yourself. A sanctuary. But every time you let someone in, they steal something sacred. Your peace. Your secrets. Your softness. Would you keep letting people in? Exactly. This is Scorpio's reality. And it terrifies people. Because we live in a world that praises openness but punishes vulnerability. And Scorpio, they know the cost of letting the wrong person close. They've paid for it in scars, silence, and spiritual bruises. Let me tell you a real story. There was a Scorpio woman named Elise, brilliant, beautiful, deeply intuitive. She met a man who said all the right things. She didn't trust him at first. Her intuition twitched, that inner Scorpio radar buzzing quietly. But the world told her, give him a chance. You're too closed off. So she silenced her instinct. She opened the gates. 6 months later, she discovered he'd been using her emotionally, financially, even spiritually. He called her paranoid when she questioned him. He gaslit her until she questioned herself. When she finally left, she didn't cry. She transformed. She rebuilt her walls with fire instead of stone. Because now she knew, her caution wasn't paranoia. It was wisdom. And that's what most people don't understand about Scorpio. Their coldness is really discernment. Their silence is protection. Their boundaries are spiritual armor. But here's the twist. Once you earn their trust, it's like holding lightning in your hands. They will defend you to the death. They will feel your pain like it's their own. They will carry your secrets into the grave. Scorpio doesn't trust easily, not because they're broken, but because they're whole enough to know their energy is a sacred gift, not a public offering. Lesson: if you ever find yourself frustrated by a Scorpio's hesitation, ask yourself, do I want to be trusted, or do I want to be worthy of their trust? Because Scorpio doesn't mistake kindness for loyalty. They look for soul-level consistency, and if you pass that test, you'll never have to question their loyalty again. Reason 2: their silence is mistaken for coldness, not wisdom. It's strange how much noise the world demands from us. Talk more, share more, post more, be loud enough to prove you exist. But Scorpio doesn't play that game. Their power lives in silence. Not the awkward silence of people with nothing to say, but the intentional, sacred silence of those who've already heard too much. And this is where most people get Scorpio all wrong. They say things like, she's so distant, he's cold. They're hard to read. But what they don't realize is that Scorpio isn't cold. They're just calculating the temperature of the room before revealing their fire. Silence is their sanctuary. It's how they listen beneath your words, how they read the tremble in your tone, the weight in your breath, the contradiction in your smile. They don't interrupt, because they're not trying to prove they're smart. They're trying to see if you are being honest. And in that stillness, they learn more about you than you'll ever learn about them. Here's the truth. Most people talk to be liked. Scorpios listen to understand. But because they don't perform emotions on cue, they're often labeled as emotionally unavailable. Yet in reality, Scorpio's silence is full of emotion, they just express it with presence, not words. I remember a story from a Scorpio nurse named Daniel. He worked in emergency trauma, a space of chaos and noise. But Daniel was known for his eerie calm, his stillness under pressure. One night, a child coded on the table. Everyone panicked. But Daniel didn't raise his voice. He moved fast, precise, like the silence inside a storm. Later, a colleague said to him, "You didn't say a word the whole time, how were you so cold?" Daniel looked up and said, "That wasn't cold. That was focus. I didn't speak because I was listening to what the body needed, to what no one else could hear." That's the Scorpio gift. They operate on a different frequency. While others drown in noise, Scorpio hears the truth behind the words. And that kind of listening, that kind of stillness, scares people who need validation from chaos. They aren't going to jump in to comfort your ego. They're going to wait and let your truth reveal itself. And when it does, they'll decide whether to open or retreat. But don't confuse their silence for disinterest. When a Scorpio is quiet, it often means they're watching over you more than anyone else in the room. Lesson: we live in a loud world that mistakes stillness for indifference. But Scorpio knows that silence is the language of the soul. So the next time a Scorpio stays quiet in your chaos, ask yourself, are they ignoring you? Or are they protecting you from saying something your spirit will regret? Reason 3: people fear what they can't control, and no one controls a Scorpio. There's something unsettling about a person you can't predict. Someone who doesn't react the way you expect, who won't play by your emotional rules, who sees the trap before you even lay it. That's what Scorpio is. They are the wild card in a rigged game, and that's why they're misunderstood, and more importantly, feared. You see, most social relationships are based on a subtle form of control. We smile to receive smiles. We flatter to receive approval. We manipulate, softly, constantly, to maintain power, to avoid rejection, to get what we want. But Scorpio can't be controlled. Not with charm, not with guilt, not with fear. Their internal compass is too strong. Their loyalty too sacred. Their independence unshakable. And that unnerves people. Because when someone refuses to dance to the music of manipulation, they force everyone else to look at their own need for control. That's why people say things like, she's intense, he's too much. They're always trying to dominate. No, Scorpio isn't trying to dominate. They're just not surrendering to emotional slavery. A Scorpio will walk away from anyone who tries to possess them even if it breaks their own heart. They'd rather feel the pain of loss than the slow death of being owned. I remember the story of a Scorpio man named Malik. He was in a relationship with someone who constantly tested his loyalty, little games, little traps. The kind of behavior that says, if you love me, you'll do what I want. But Malik never gave in. Not out of pride, but out of principle. He told her one day, if your love comes with a leash, it's not love. It's ownership. And that was the end. Not because he didn't care, but because he knew, the moment you start letting someone chip away at your freedom, you've already betrayed yourself. That's the core of Scorpio's misunderstood nature. They demand autonomy, spiritual, emotional, mental. And this independence is misread as rebellion, as defiance, as arrogance. But in truth, it's just sacred self-respect. And deep down, those who fear Scorpios are really fearing the mirror they hold up. A mirror that shows them how easily they are controlled, and how dangerous real freedom looks. Lesson: if you try to control a Scorpio, you will lose them. If you try to possess them, they will vanish. But if you honor their freedom, if you meet them eye to eye, soul to soul, you'll unlock a loyalty that empires have been built upon. Because Scorpios don't submit to control. They surrender only to truth. Reason 4. Scorpios feel everything, they just don't show it. Let's get one thing straight. Just because someone is quiet, doesn't mean they're not feeling everything. In fact, the ones who say the least often carry the most. And no one proves that more than Scorpio. On the outside, they're composed, stoic, controlled. They can walk into the most emotional situations and barely flinch. They'll sit in the middle of chaos with eyes like still water. But inside, they're oceans. Crashing, surging, swirling with emotion so deep, most people wouldn't survive 5 seconds in it. And that's the secret no one sees. Because Scorpios don't show what they feel. They protect what they feel. Why? Because they've learned the hard way. The world exploits visible emotion. Tears are labeled weakness. Anger is demonized. Vulnerability gets weaponized. So Scorpio becomes the vault. Their heart beats behind steel. Not because they lack emotion, but because they have too much of it to waste on people who won't handle it with care. Let me take you into a true story. A Scorpio woman named Nina was at her mother's funeral. Everyone was crying, collapsing, reaching for comfort. But Nina, she stood silently, almost too calmly. People whispered, how is she not crying? Does she even care? What they didn't know was that she had cried for 2 nights straight, alone, in silence. That she wrote letters to her mother every night for a week. That she lit candles and spoke to her in prayer. That her grief was a ritual, not a performance. Scorpio doesn't emote for attention. They feel privately, sacredly, and sometimes, silently. This is what makes them such powerful empaths. They don't just notice how people feel. They absorb it. They carry it in their bones. And that's why they need space, time, solitude. Because when the weight gets too heavy, they don't explode, they burn it quietly from the inside out. So yes, Scorpio can appear emotionless to the shallow observer. But those who truly know them, they'll tell you, Scorpio feels everything. They just don't need to prove it to you. Lesson: in a world where emotion is often exploited, Scorpio teaches us the value of sacred privacy. They remind us that true feeling doesn't always need to be performed, sometimes, it just needs to be honored. So the next time a Scorpio seems cold, ask yourself, are they unfeeling? Or are they protecting a fire so powerful, it would burn the wrong hands? Reason 5, they speak truth that others aren't ready to hear. Truth is a double-edged sword. Everyone claims they want it until it's turned toward them. Until it slices through their illusions, their excuses, their carefully curated personas. And no one wields that sword more naturally than a Scorpio. Scorpio doesn't sugarcoat. They don't tiptoe around your feelings. They don't edit their truth just to keep you comfortable. Because to them, truth is sacred, not negotiable. And this is exactly why they're misunderstood. People say things like, "She's too blunt," "He's harsh," "They're always so intense." But let's be honest. What they really mean is, "They said something I wasn't ready to face." Scorpio doesn't speak to impress. They speak to reveal. And what they reveal often threatens the fragile illusions people cling to. They can look at you and see you. Not just the mask you wear in public, but the wounds you hide, the contradictions you justify, the lies you tell yourself to avoid growth. And then, without flinching, they'll say the one thing no one else dares to say. Let me tell you a story. There was a Scorpio man named Jalen, a therapist, beloved by his clients but always described as brutally honest. One of his clients came to him complaining that everyone abandoned her, friends, lovers, even her children. She expected sympathy. Jalen listened quietly. Then he said, "I hear your pain. But have you ever considered that you may be emotionally exhausting to love because you demand presence but refuse to offer accountability?" The room went silent. She cried. But she came back the next week and thanked him. That's Scorpio. They're not afraid to say what needs to be said. Even if it makes them unpopular. Even if it ends a relationship. Even if it earns them the title of too much. Because Scorpio doesn't speak from ego, they speak from X-ray vision. From intuition. From soul contracts they signed long before this life began. They know some truths hurt, but they also heal. And they'd rather hurt you with honesty than protect you with a lie. That kind of energy, it intimidates people. Especially those addicted to being comfortable instead of being free. Lesson. In a world drowning in polite lies, Scorpio is the rare voice of raw truth. Their words aren't always soft, but they are always aligned. If a Scorpio speaks truth into your life, don't run. Lean in. Because behind the sting is an invitation to evolve. Reason 6. Their intensity is often confused with aggression. There's a look in Scorpio's eyes that most people will never forget. It's not angry. It's not wild. It's something deeper, like their gaze is searching for something inside your soul that even you haven't dared to face. And that intensity, it terrifies people. Why? Because in a world that prefers things light, filtered, and manageable, Scorpio shows up unfiltered and unapologetic. They bring their full presence, their full passion, their full perception. And people confuse that energy, that truthful charge, with hostility. They say, "You're being aggressive. Why are you so intense? You need to relax." But Scorpio isn't trying to dominate the room. They are the room. They don't enter quietly, not because they seek attention, but because their aura demands it. This intensity is often mistaken for combativeness. But Scorpio isn't here to fight everyone. They just refuse to be fake. And in a world built on emotional small talk, their authenticity feels like an attack. Here's the story of a Scorpio woman named Raquel, a high school teacher known for being firm, passionate, and extremely devoted to her students. She once stopped a parent-teacher meeting mid-sentence and said, "You want me to tell you your son needs more tutoring? But that's not true. He needs you to put your phone down and ask him how he feels about being ignored." The parent was furious, called her aggressive, threatened to report her. But 2 weeks later, that parent returned, apologized, and admitted that her words cracked something open in him. That's the Scorpio effect. They cut through surface-level noise to expose what's real. And real emotions, they aren't always pretty. They're intense, messy, uncomfortable. Scorpio embodies that reality without shame. But most people aren't used to that kind of raw presence. So they project their own discomfort back onto the Scorpio, labeling them angry or threatening. But in truth, Scorpio is simply fully alive in a world that teaches people to dim down. Lesson. Intensity is not aggression. And Scorpio's energy isn't here to hurt you, it's here to wake you up. If their presence makes you uncomfortable, ask yourself, is it because they're too much? Or because you've settled for too little? Reason 7. They walk alone not because they're antisocial, but because they're spiritual warriors. People often misunderstand solitude. They think being alone means being lonely. That choosing your own company over others is a sign of emotional distance or antisocial behavior. But for Scorpio, solitude is not punishment, it's power. They walk alone because that's where their soul speaks the loudest. Because in silence, away from noise and shallow energy, they regenerate. This self-chosen isolation is often misunderstood. People say things like, "She's so closed off. He's distant." They don't want to be part of the group. But what they fail to realize is that Scorpio walks alone not to avoid others, but to protect their frequency. Scorpios are deeply spiritual beings, old souls, warriors of unseen realms. They carry energy that needs to be guarded, not constantly diluted by meaningless interaction. When a Scorpio retreats, they're not running away. They're recharging. They're going within to battle shadows, to meditate, to commune with forces most people can't comprehend. Let me tell you about a Scorpio artist named Caleb. He disappeared for months at a time. No phone. No social media. No explanation. Friends would say, "He's ghosting everyone again." But during those periods of solitude, Caleb was painting. Not for fame. Not for money. He was channeling visions, dreams, ancestral memories, and pouring them onto canvas. When he finally returned, he didn't explain. He just said, "Sometimes I need to disappear to become." That's Scorpio in a sentence. They disappear to become. And the world, obsessed with constant connection and explanation, finds that threatening. People don't like what they can't access. And a Scorpio's soul is access controlled. It takes initiation, trust, integrity, spiritual alignment to truly enter their inner world. And even then, there will always be a piece of them reserved for the sacred. Because at their core, Scorpios are spiritual warriors. They fight internal battles most will never see. They face darkness that others run from. And they do it, often, alone. Not because they're broken, but because their path requires it. Lesson: aloneness isn't weakness. It's preparation. And Scorpios walk alone because they're walking through realms others avoid. If a Scorpio pulls away, don't chase. Honor the silence. Respect the transformation. Because when they return, they'll be someone even more powerful than before. Reason 8. Scorpio transforms through pain, and others only see the scars. Pain breaks most people. It bends their spirit. It makes them bitter, guarded, or emotionally paralyzed. But for Scorpio, pain is alchemy. It's not just something they endure, it's something they use. To evolve. To awaken. To shed one version of themselves, and become something deeper, wiser, more spiritually armored. Yet, this transformation often comes at a cost. Because when Scorpio emerges from the fire, people don't see the journey. They only see the burn marks. They don't see the dark night of the soul, the sleepless nights, the spiritual deaths. They just say, "Wow, you've changed." As if it's a surprise. As if change wasn't the only way to survive. Scorpio is ruled by Pluto, the planet of death, rebirth, and transformation. This is not a poetic metaphor, it's their energetic blueprint. They are designed to walk into emotional hell and come back with sacred knowledge. They are the phoenix, born in ash, rising in silence. But here's the problem. Most people don't understand spiritual death. They fear it. They judge it. So when Scorpio goes quiet during a storm, when they pull away, when they're grieving in ways that don't look like crying, the world calls them cold, detached, or unstable. But that's not detachment. That's inner surgery. Scorpio is rearranging themselves at a soul level. Let me tell you about Amora, a Scorpio who lost both parents within 6 months. No one saw her break. She kept going to work, smiled politely, checked in on friends. People assumed she was doing fine. But behind closed doors, she meditated for hours. She studied death rituals from ancient traditions. She wrote letters to her ancestors. She transformed her grief into a spiritual path. A year later, she quit her corporate job and became a grief counselor, helping others walk through their own fire. No one saw the death that birthed her calling. They only saw the new version, and said, "You've changed." But Scorpio doesn't change for applause. They change because their soul demands it. Lesson: pain is a portal, and Scorpio doesn't run from it. They enter it. And that makes others uncomfortable. Because transformation is lonely. It's ugly. It's raw. But Scorpio reminds us. It's also sacred. And if you ever see their scars, don't ask what happened to them. Ask instead, who did they become because of it? Reason 9. They remember everything, and that unsettles shallow minds. There are people who forget what you said 5 minutes after you leave the room. They forget promises. They forget pain they caused. They forget what they said when they were angry, or what they did when they thought no one was watching. Scorpio is not one of those people. Scorpio remembers everything. Not in a petty way. Not in a keep score kind of way. But in a soul-deep archive of emotional truth. They remember how you made them feel. Every word, every tone, every flicker of energy that crossed the line. And for many, that's terrifying. Because most people want forgiveness without accountability. They want to act however they choose, and then ask, "Can't you just let it go?" But Scorpio doesn't just let go. They process. They record. They embed. Their memory is emotional, energetic, cellular. They may forgive, eventually, but they will never forget the blueprint of your energy. Why? Because forgetting means risking repetition. And Scorpio learns from pain, not just theirs, but yours too. People often say, "Why can't you just move on?" But what they're really asking is, "Why do you make me feel seen for what I did?" That's the power of Scorpio's memory. It exposes what others would rather leave buried. Let me tell you about Devon, a Scorpio lawyer with a quiet demeanor and unnerving eye contact. A colleague once made a harmless joke about Devon's past during a staff meeting. Devon said nothing, smiled, moved on. A year later, that same colleague needed Devon's help on a case. Devon declined. When asked why, he simply said, "I don't forget what reveals character. That day, you showed me yours." Was it revenge? No. It was clarity. Boundaries drawn from memory, not malice. Scorpio doesn't hold grudges to be cruel. They hold on to data, to patterns, to energy signatures. Because to a Scorpio, every interaction is sacred intel. And they never stop paying attention. That makes shallow people nervous. Because most people count on being forgotten. But with Scorpio, your energy leaves a permanent fingerprint. Lesson: memory isn't about punishment, it's about protection. Scorpio teaches us that remembering isn't weakness, it's wisdom. So if a Scorpio keeps their distance, don't ask what's wrong. Ask what you did that they're still carrying in silence. Because they don't need revenge. Their memory is sharp enough to reshape their loyalty. Reason 10. They test loyalty, and the world hates being tested. We live in a world obsessed with appearances. Everyone claims to be loyal until tested. Everyone says they're real until reality arrives. But Scorpio doesn't believe words. They believe patterns. They believe energy. They believe in proof, not promises. And that's where they become a mystery, even a threat, to most people. Because Scorpio doesn't just love. They vet. They observe. They wait. They test. They'll watch how you act when you think they're not watching. They'll say nothing, but notice everything. They'll drop subtle cues to see how you respond when it matters. And this isn't manipulation. It's survival. You see, Scorpio has learned, sometimes the hardest way, that not everyone who smiles is safe. That "I love you" can be a mask. That betrayal often comes with a hug. So they test. Not because they don't want to love you, but because they want to love you safely. And that unsettles people. Because most people want unconditional access, but aren't willing to offer unconditional integrity. They say, "Why are you testing me? Why can't you just trust me already?" But Scorpio's trust is not impulsive. It's earned like sacred ground. You don't walk in without proving you won't set fire to the temple. Let me tell you about a Scorpio woman named Kira. She was in a relationship with a man who said all the right things. But Kira, being Scorpio, watched his actions. One day, she told him something small but vulnerable, a family secret. The next week, he repeated it casually in front of friends. Not maliciously, just carelessly. She didn't argue. She didn't scold. She just shifted. A week later, she broke it off. When he asked why, she said, "Because I handed you something sacred, and you dropped it without knowing what it was." That's a Scorpio loyalty test, quiet, spiritual, often misunderstood. The world wants instant connection. Scorpio wants soul verification. They don't want just a partner. They want an ally, a guardian. Someone who understands loyalty isn't about never messing up. It's about showing up when it counts. And if you pass the test, you get a Scorpios forever. If you fail, they won't punish you. They'll just vanish from your life like a ghost you never deserved to meet. Lesson: loyalty isn't something you declare, it's something you prove. And Scorpio reminds us that real connection demands real depth. If you ever feel like you're being tested by a Scorpio, it's not a game. It's a ritual. A spiritual checkpoint. Pass it, and you're no longer just a friend. You're part of their inner sanctum. Reason 11. Scorpios are protectors disguised as threats. It's one of the greatest paradoxes in the Zodiac. That the sign most feared is often the one most devoted to protecting those they love. But that's Scorpio for you. They don't wear their heart on their sleeve. They wear it under armor. They don't protect with soft words, they protect with sharp instincts. And the world, in its shallow perception, mistakes that fierce devotion for danger. They say, "You're too intense. You're too possessive. You're scary when you're mad." But let's make this clear. Scorpio doesn't get mad for no reason. They react to betrayal. They stand up when someone's being mistreated. They intervene when silence would be easier, but injustice is happening. And they do it with fire. They don't whisper, they roar. Not to threaten, but to warn. Because Scorpio is like a storm, powerful, yes. But that power is not to destroy the innocent. It's to protect them from the ones who prey on weakness. There's a story about Elijah, a Scorpio man who worked security at a nightclub. Most people avoided him. He had that look, calm, silent, unreadable. They called him the Shadow. But one night, a drunk man cornered a young woman near the back hallway. Before she could even scream, Elijah was there. No words. Just presence. He stepped in, stared the man down, and said, "You have 3 seconds to remember your mother taught you better." The situation ended without a fight, because that's the thing. Scorpio's energy alone is a boundary. Later, the woman thanked him and asked, "How did you know something was wrong?" He replied, "Because I felt her fear before I saw her face." That's a Scorpio protector. Not loud. Not performative. Just tuned in, spiritually, emotionally, viscerally. But again, misunderstood. Because their boundaries look like walls. Their silence looks like judgment. Their defense looks like domination. But the truth: Scorpio defends harder than anyone because they love deeper than anyone. They're the type to take the bullet and never mention the scar. To destroy the threat without needing applause. They're the soul who will fight for you, even when the world calls them the threat. Lesson: sometimes the one who scares you is the one who would die protecting you. Scorpio reminds us that real love isn't always gentle. Sometimes it's fierce. Sometimes it wears black. Sometimes it speaks in silence and stares through lies. And if you're lucky enough to be loved by a Scorpio, you'll never need a shield again. Because they are the shield. Reason 12. They're not mysterious to confuse you, they're private to protect themselves. One of the most common things said about Scorpio is, "They're so mysterious. I can never tell what they're thinking. They're always hiding something." But mystery, for Scorpio, is not manipulation. It's not a game. It's self-preservation. In a world where oversharing is rewarded and vulnerability is often exploited, Scorpio makes a different choice. To guard their spirit. They're not trying to confuse you. They're trying to protect themselves from being consumed. Because make no mistake, Scorpio is deeply open. They just don't offer that openness to everyone. They don't scatter their energy in every direction. They channel it. Intentionally. Sacredly. Their privacy is not about pride, it's about peace. Scorpios have learned that the more people know about you, the more they think they own pieces of you. And Scorpio doesn't belong to anyone. Their thoughts, their feelings, their wounds all held behind spiritual velvet ropes. Let me tell you about Jasmine, a Scorpio poet. She had a large following, but almost no one knew anything about her personal life. One fan once asked her, "Why don't you ever talk about your relationships or your past?" She replied, "Because the moment I give the world my most sacred stories, I can't protect their meaning anymore." That's what people don't understand about Scorpio. Privacy, for them, is a boundary that preserves the power of their truth. Yes, they'll share, but only with those who've earned it. Not just with curiosity, but with consistency. Not just with attention, but with devotion. And when they do open up, when a Scorpio finally lets you in, it's never shallow. It's never casual. It's a soul-level offering, quiet, rare, and irrevocable. But if you rush them, if you demand access without earning trust, you'll find yourself standing outside their door, hearing your own voice echo back with no reply, and you'll call them mysterious, when really, you were just not safe enough to be invited in. Lesson: mystery is not always concealment. Sometimes it's protection. Sometimes it's a boundary made of silence, not to keep others confused, but to keep the sacred intact. Scorpio teaches us that privacy is not coldness. It's reverence. And the soul that guards itself fiercely often loves the most deeply. Conclusion: you never truly knew a Scorpio, until now. So now that you've walked with me through the fire, the shadows, the stillness, the storms, let me ask you this. Was Scorpio ever really the villain? Or were they just the only one brave enough to live without pretending? You see, we fear what we don't understand. And Scorpio doesn't exist on the surface. They don't give you easy access. They don't explain themselves to those who haven't earned the right to witness their truth. And that's why they're misunderstood. Not because they're broken, but because they're whole in a world that rewards fragmentation. Not because they're mean, but because they refuse to water themselves down. They are mirrors, thresholds, sacred storms. They will challenge your lies, not to shame you, but to free you. They will hold silence like a weapon, not to hurt you, but to teach you that some truths must be heard in stillness. They will walk away, not because they don't care, but because they care too deeply to stay where the energy is unworthy. Scorpios are not easy. They were never meant to be. They're initiations. They are sacred keepers of spiritual depth, loyalty, and transformation. And if you ever find yourself loved by one, not just admired, not just flirted with, but chosen, know that you've been trusted by one of the rarest energies this world holds. Life lesson: this world needs more people like Scorpio, not because they're perfect, but because they remind us what it means to live all the way in, to feel with your whole chest, to love without faking it, to see the world not as it pretends to be, but as it truly is. They teach us to stop fearing emotional depth, to stop performing connection and start becoming it. So maybe, just maybe, the next time you meet someone who's intense, silent, mysterious, or too much, you'll pause. And instead of judging them, you'll ask, what are they protecting? What sacred fire lives beneath their silence? And in that moment, you won't just understand Scorpio, you'll begin to understand yourself. Sparkles if this journey revealed something deep inside you, if it made you feel seen, understood, awakened. White right pointing backhand index. Then I invite you to subscribe to the Path to Buddha Wisdom, where we decode not just astrology but the hidden wisdom of the soul. Because the universe doesn't just speak in stars, it whispers through signs, silence, and transformation. And Scorpio is the master translator. Until next time, honor your shadow, trust your depth, and remember, the most powerful truths are the ones nobody sees, except a Scorpio.